Today is Wednesday afternoon. We're going to begin our third sign of what it means to be a dynamic Catholic, a dynamic Pauline. In Matthew Kelly's book, it is generosity. For us, it is the vow of poverty. So today we'll be looking at generosity through what Matthew Kelly shares with us. He says, the happiest people I know are also the most generous people I know. He says, in everything we attribute to God, we see immense acts of generosity. Creation is generous. God saw that it was good. Free will is generous. We can choose, make decisions. We can follow, we cannot follow. Life is generous. We have abundance of life. Love is generous from God. God is love. Constantly shares his love, constantly outpouring. It's we that reject the love through our free will. So the generosity of God is awesome. I should sing Awesome God, but then we'd have to not put that on YouTube. So. Matthew Kelly says when he reads the Gospels, he says he always seems to catch new glimpses into the life and teaching of Jesus. He says the Gospels are always fresh. There's always something new, and it's not because they change, it's because of the way we change. So when we are on our own spiritual journey, and we could go back and read that passage again and again, where we are always growing. I know some of our priests in the church who save their homilies, and then they bring it out every year. It's the same homily. Now, in some cases, it's going to be the same thoughts, but I don't write down any of my homilies only because when I get to it 3 years from now or next year or something, my journey has changed and maybe there's something a little bit different. However, that doesn't mean it's going to sound the same or not have the same type of things that are going on. If we look at the great figures that emerge in the gospel, we will see that they are generous people as well. Mary's response to God was very generous on her part, to accept that God was going to make her the mother of God. She said, thy will be done, because of her own background, her own spirituality. The Magi, traveling afar with gifts for Jesus. They were generous with their time, generous with their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Generous with their coming to acknowledge the presence of Jesus and something miraculous happening in the world. The centurion who begs Jesus to cure his servant was very generous, knowing that he was considered an outsider, but he had the faith and the belief because what he had seen in the life of Jesus. He asked for a healing of a servant. Jesus says, I will come to you, and he says, no. All you have to do is to say the word and I will believe. We say that in our Mass every day. The 12 leave everything to follow Jesus. So they are very generous in giving themselves completely in their time. They remove all their ties that they have. Jesus himself is very generous. Generous in teaching them, telling them stories, giving them new insights. I remember my professor in Christology says, I'm going to present to you different viewpoints of the message I'm trying to get across. So he would come at it from different ways. And he says, and the reason I do that is because one of those ways is going to touch you. And then you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But I may come this way, and it doesn't mean anything to you, but if I approach it from this angle, then it's going to help you. So I think Jesus was very generous in how he taught. He was generous in feeding them, multiplying the loaves and the fishes several times, feeding the multitude, giving them the bread of life, giving us the bread of life. Jesus was generous in healing them. It shows him going around just by his touch, just by them touching him, they are healed. And even at the end it says there are many more stories that we can tell you, but these are the ones that we've gathered for you. He was very generous in providing spiritual leadership. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, in providing them what they needed to do in order to experience the reign of God, the kingdom of God. Jesus himself was comforting them, especially with his friends, Martha and Mary, when they lost their brother Lazarus. Healing, bringing with them, comforting with them. So Matthew Kelly says, when I see all the things that are going on with the Lord interacting in people's lives and how generous they can be, he compared God and the world together, which is what is on the board. He says, with God he sees a life of gratitude, and in the world a life of discontent. God can provide us what we need. He says, in God we find trust, faith. In the world we find fear. In God he is giving. The world is getting or taking. God, we cooperate with his providence. The world, self-determinism. We try to make the decisions instead of putting our faith. Priscilla will appreciate this. One time I saw a program of action from the province of the Philippines. And they outlined all these different projects that they were going to do. And in their outlining of the projects, they had the time frame, what they were going to do, the time frame they were going to do it, and how they were going to finance it. So the earlier ones had certain amounts of finances, but the latter 7 or 8 was all under God's providence, is the way they had it. We're going to do this, we're going to do it by such and such, and God's providence. So they're going to put their faith and trust that the Lord was going to provide them when they get there to that particular project to hide. So we need to put our faith and trust in the Lord. All you got to do is read all the stories about Father Alberione. He needed money to complete the building of a certain project, and he put that in the tabernacle, and the next day he got the exact amount that he needed to pay off his debtors so he can continue on. Under God we have stewardship. We take care of the world in which we live. In the world it's more of ownership. It belongs to me, it doesn't belong to you. Do we own the world, or are we stewards for the world? We get gifts from God. In the world, we feel that we are entitled. We have done what we're supposed to do, and so we are entitled to receive. Under God, we look after our neighbor. How can we be generous with our time? Generous with caring for them. Whereas in the world, we have a tendency of looking only for ourselves. So we don't care about others. With God, we have an abundance, because he is generous. He gives us all that we knew. World tends to be scarcity, partly because we tend to buy everything, or because we want to hold on to everything and not share. And under God, we live generous lives, and in the world, we tend to live small, selfish life. So if we're looking at the sign of generosity is how can we be generous in the lives of other people? Matthew Kelly says, dynamic Catholics recognize their blessings. They took time regularly to identify the people, the opportunities, and possessions that brought them gratitude. So remember, we went back to that prayer process. One of it is the gratitude. And one of it is looking after the events and peoples and things that brought them that are important in their life. So these people who are generous, they realize the blessings. I am blessed with these people. I am blessed with my neighbors. I am blessed with a family. God has blessed me with this beautiful house. God has blessed me with the possessions I may have. God has blessed me with these various events that I can see the Lord working in the world around me. So if we are dynamic Paulines, we're going to see the many blessings that the Lord has given us and the joyfulness that we have and reward that we receive. We often speak of generosity or stewardship in terms of time, talent, and treasure, as we spoke earlier. God's promise is that He will provide for our needs, not that He will provide for our greed. And Matthew Kelly quotes Mother Teresa, who said, "Live simply so that others may simply live." And of course, in our vow of poverty, we are asked to live simply. Get by on the things that we need, not always the things that we want. Generosity and justice go hand in hand. If we are truly generous, then social justice will become an integral part of who we are. It is a generosity that challenges us to change the conditions that make them poor. So if we are generous, we want to look at how we can solve perhaps some of the issues and the concerns. One time we had Brian Corbin. Is he still at the diocese?
No, he's out of the center.
But Brian Corbin was a man who was sort of like the social justice office for the Diocese of Youngstown. He came to speak to us, and he talked about how, you know, you're sitting in a town with a river, and you see all these bodies that are coming down the river, and you pull them out, and you're taking care of them and respecting them, and one of the ways you can be generous is looking after these bodies that are coming into the town. But he says if we really want to be generous, we want to go up the river and find out what's causing all these bodies to be coming down the river, and to find out if there's something we can solve there. So if we're going to be very generous, it's the time of our social justice, is the sense of how we can solve various situations. Now again, we can look at, we can't solve everything, but we might be able to solve a few things. We might be able to find some resources. As I mentioned, you know, we've had people that stop by looking for handouts at our monastery or our places, and sometimes we can help them, sometimes we can't, but we might know people that can help them. Go here, go there. At one time, one of the grocery stores in Canfield would provide vouchers. And that was a way that when people come and ask for money for food, you can give them a voucher. And it would be, you could set up to a certain amount that they could go down there, and it'd have the church's name on it, and then the church would be billed. But we could say, okay, we'll give you $50 or $100. But it was only good for that place, and the food was only specific things. You're not going to buy your beer and your wine and things that you don't need. So there was a way that they were getting the money because they were still going to bill us or the churches, and then the people got food, which were going to be good food and not stuff that they really don't need. And so it was a way that there was a help or assistance, or you know, things from Catholic Charities or things from the diocese that can provide different things. He says the dynamic Catholics are generous with their time and talent, with their money and possessions, but their generosity goes way beyond these commonly defined terms. Generosity is central to their value system, and they often think in terms of how they can do the most good with what they have at their disposal. So they are generous parents, they are generous grandparents, they are generous lovers, they are generous with their praise and their appreciation and their gratitude and their thankfulness and their encouragement. So they are constantly encouraging people, constantly looking at the bright side, constantly getting people to see where the Lord is in their life, constantly asking people to pray, constantly offering them to the Lord, constantly looking out at how generous they are, and they always seem very happy, and they always seem to be blessed in many ways because they have truly seen the way that God has touched them. So whether they have a lot or they don't, they're always reaching out and assisting others. So it's not just their time, not just their talent, and not just their treasure, but it is always in their lives that they live within their families and with others. He says if you ask them what the source of this great generosity is, they must almost always cite how blessed they consider themselves to be, and how they themselves have been the recipients of incredible generosity throughout the course of their lives. And dynamic Catholics make the connection between everything they do and their faith life. So because it was handed on to them, they hand it on to others. Often they talk about paying forward, giving it to the next person, being the generous. So when they look at how they've been touched, either by the blessings of the Lord in their life or the generosity of others around them, how much they feel that they can share and give to others. So it becomes a part of their faith life. It becomes a part of their value system. It becomes part of who they are. It's like they can't stop being generous. Jesus speaks of return of 100-fold in this world and eternal life in the next. We often use that in vocation masses and reflections. And I promise you 100-fold, brothers and mothers and sisters and what have you. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how generous are we with God? One way we can be generous with God is by spending time with Him. Remember, all these are connected. We're back to that time of prayer. Give Him the time, give Him the place, give Him our commitment. We don't give Him the leftovers. We don't give Him the scraps. We give Him the main course. It's not like, oh, if I have time, I'll go pray today. It's, no, I'm going to make time to go pray. But dedicating a specific time each day for prayer is one of our ways of being generous with the Lord. He also discovered that very often the busiest people are the most generous with volunteering. And it's true, I've seen that. People who are constantly filling up their day with helping and assisting and volunteering and reaching out with the church and with other groups. Maybe because they're organized, maybe because they know how to structure their day. Some of the people that reach out and help us, sometimes I wonder what their spouses think. They always seem to be over here. But then you come to find out their spouses are just as volunteering and helping as they are. So when they find they're generous with the volunteering, they made time to do this. We are called to live generous lives and to grow in the area of generosity as the surest ways of growing spiritually. But in order to grow our generosity, we first need to get a sense of where we are today. So we do that evaluation. We do that examine. Where are we in our generosity? Where are we with our time? Where are we in our spirituality? Because all of that coordinates together. Take the time for prayer, take the time for study, do what we need to be generous in reaching out and helping others. He says one of the key lessons here is that it is important to measure things that matter. Measurement creates awareness. Awareness leads to intentionality, and intentionality drives behavior. So you evaluate what is important, what is not important. We measure the things that matter. It's important that I take time for prayer. It's important that I volunteer. It's important I reach out. It's important I go to certain things. Because then when we begin to look at that, then he says that means we become awareness. Aware of the things that are going on, aware of the needs, aware of the concerns, and then we lead to intentionality. We're going to intend to do certain things, work towards certain things, and that leads to actually our behavior and the actions that we're going to do. So we're constantly looking at the things that are happening. The final point I want to mention with Matthew Kelly is he looks at, it's titled Money, a Starting Point. He says, so much of our hopes, our fears, our security, and identity can be affected by money. And so we tend to be on high alert around the subject of money. And when it comes to generosity, money is either a starting point or a stumbling point. So a lot of our decisions are based on money. And so it can be a source where how can we get more money and build upon what we have, or we're not going to do this because we don't have the money, we don't have the funds. So money is very important to us. He says one of the most common complaints about the church is that we talk too much about money. Now, I think only on rare occasions we, within our chapels, will speak about money. I know Father Tony did some of it as we want to renovate some of the things that we're doing. He mentioned that we need some assistance. But I don't think we stand up and talk about the money that's going on in our congregation. I have heard it on occasion in the parish where they present the financial report and where are we, what's going on. Sometimes the report is within the bulletin and then they'll make the announcement. And I've heard the complaint myself that every time Father stands up there, always seems to be about money and how we need more of it. But oftentimes people who are the stewards of their parish do want to know the things that are going on. So it may or may not necessarily be true, or maybe it's just a perception that we think that it's all about money, and it may not be. So he says we need to start talking about the whole money picture. Giving. How can we give money? Earning. Saving our money. How we spend it. He says people who are generous with their money tend to have thought through the financial affairs of their lives. How much can we give to these various organizations and structures? Or you decide who you're going to help. You can't help everybody, so my focus is going to be on certain topics or certain matters. So we're going to look at how much money we're making, and then we adjust accordingly, because we may be in an abundance of money coming in at a certain point, but then we might be laid off, or between jobs, or our hours are cut back, and so the money will become a little bit less. And so therefore we need to look at doing those things. So he says the point in each of us is that we must prayerfully consider what God is calling to us in this area and set goals for ourselves accordingly. Goals bring out the best in us. We have goals for everything else. Isn't it time we have generosity goals? He says maybe it's time we had a budget. Yeah, we've been saying that for years. We only had a budget. But it is key to look. So what we ask from the members every year, in the beginning of the year, so it's technically the end of the year in January, is your financial statement. Not so that I can total up how much all of you are making, but it's a point for you, and it's a point for the director to make sure that things are in line. And then with that, you're going to project out what your budget will be for the rest of the year. I'm going to have to buy a new car this year. So I've allotted X amount of money for that. And I'm going to lease it, so it's going to be so much per month, and I make so much per month, and I can do these different things. So that financial statement helps you to review and see how the year has gone, just as we ask you to do a program of life. What are you going to do spiritually? What are you going to do apostolically? What are you going to do about communicating with the director and the other members of the Institute and the Pauline family? Outline a program of your next year. And again, they usually say this time of retreat is the time to do that. So it's time to evaluate. It's the time to look. And again, the financial report and all the ones that I have received over the years is not that I said, aha, this is what everybody makes. But it allows me to look and see how they are doing, and if there's some sort of a struggle, maybe we need to talk. Because we don't want someone to falter and to go under, so to speak. So this dynamic Catholic is generosity. We're going to end here, and tomorrow we'll look at Father Alberione and his whole sense of poverty. Von Buch Perfectus Sit on what it enables us to do. And it fits right in with looking at the vow of poverty, looking at living the simple life, and how that poverty enables us then to focus on what the Lord has given us, and therefore share His providence with others. So I thank you for your time today.